Behind my screen, it's completely different than to be on court. And I remember that last year, I remember that I was very impressed with the quality of the organization. So even if it's complicated to speak about technique behind the screen, I think I have made some contents with a lot of video to illustrate my information. So the topic of my presentation is about the performance factors of the forehand shot in tennis. And I used the most relevant information from scientific research, and I try to translate it into simple visual cues for you coaches on the court. All the contents are extracts, most of the contents are extracts from my online course. So you have the link after the course if you want to see. There is some course about biomechanics of tennis ground strokes, some of serve, footwork, and so on. So just this video to introduce the topic, just to see that the forehand at high level is now, both for men and for female, it's a weapon you must have to be at high level. You use it to dictate the game, to dictate the rally. And you use it mainly at the place of the backhand. Now, why this forehand is so important in the game? There is a recent study that shown that the frequencies of forehand and backhand ground strokes did not significantly differ between men and women at the Australian Open. So it was quite interesting because we say that mainly the girls hit more backhand than forehand. Now we see that the tendency for the woman is to do the same thing that the men. That is, every time they can turn around and use the forehand, they use it. So maybe one of the explanation is that the speed you can have with the forehand is always higher than that of the backhand. It's around 10, 20% for the male and around 5% for the females. But every time you can hit a little more faster with the forehand. So it seems to be essential to be at high level to produce high ball speed. Now, I will start with some studies just to understand what are the factors that contribute to the speed, maximum speed of the ball at contact. So one of the first studies, one that analyzed the factors contributing to the racket speed, was that of Elliott et al. And they showed that regardless of the grip, the horizontal flexion and the internal rotation of the shoulder was the main contributors to the racket speed. Then they act in addition to linear velocity of the shoulder that is produced by the extension of the lower lips and trunk rotation. The other factors were the wrist rotation, and in combination of wrist rotation, you have palmar flexion, but you have also ulnar and radial deviation. And finally, the elbow joint with the extension, the action was very minimal. So in order to produce this racket speed, the players use what we call the kinetic chain. In the kinetic chain, the increase in rotation is done in sequence involving the largest muscle masses. That is, we start with the lower limbs that generate the forces from the ground, and that will accelerate the rotation of the hips and the trunk. You can see on the picture that first, there is the timing on the peak velocity, and there is the angular velocity. That you can see that you hit from the hips, from the trunk, from the shoulders, it goes faster and faster when you increase in the chain. So the forces will then be transferred to the upper limb and the racket. And during this chain, what is important to understand is that the acceleration of one segment is just amplified by that of the previous segment. That is, when the segment decelerates, the other one accelerates. It's what we call the domino effect. So I invented and to compare the kinetic chain with the 3 rocket model. So I will let the video play 2 or 3 times just in order for you to understand the different phases. Okay, so last time. So you see that the first thing you have is what we call the loading phase. We see the loading phase, it coincides with the maximum knee flexion. You store the energy at this time, maximum knee bend, and then you release the energy first with the lower limbs, you push it to engage the ground with extension. This is coordinated with the hips and trunk rotation. And then all the rotation of the upper limb. So we know what are the main factors to produce the 100% maximum ball speed at contact. But what is interesting to know for the players, for the coaches, is how you can accelerate the ball. That is, when you are at 50% to 100%, what are the factors on which you can act to accelerate the ball? And there is a study who analyzed this. This schematic study analyzed the angular velocities at different joints to find out which ones had the greatest influence on the increase of ball speed in forehand. The results show that the angular velocities of the back leg extension and that of trunk rotation increased significantly with that of ball speed, while those of the upper limbs, that is internal rotation and the others, were not significantly different. Or we saw that the arm rotation was the main factor. It's just to explain that alone, the arms can't rotate at the same speed. It can reach this speed just because before there is the actions of the legs and of the trunk. So if you want to increase the ball speed, to accelerate the ball, you have to first focus on the first stage, that is the lower limbs, and the second stage, the trunk. So now, we need some model to analyze the technique. There is what we call the descriptive model. And the descriptive model is just a description of key points in relation with the position of the racket. So I will let the video play 2 or 3 times. This model, descriptive model, it allows just to define the different phases of the stroke, that are the backswing, the forward swing, and follow through for the kinematic analysis. So we start with the initiation of the movement of the racket on the side with a uniturn, that is stage 1. The stage 2 is the highest position of the racket. Then the stage 3, the rearmost position of the racket. And this one is the transition. We'll see later what is the transition. Then we have the lowest position of the racket. So there's the loop, the contact point, and the most forward position of the racket. So you see that you have all the paths of the racket, so you can analyze the amplitude and the speed the racket speed. So the last time. So what is interesting with this model? You can compare different players, but you can also compare the same players in different situations. That is, you play with neutral rhythm and then there is acceleration. If the player is able to reduce the backswing, it's a good adaptation. Sometimes there is some what we call stereotype. There's a big loop, and this big loop is not efficient when the ball is coming fast. So it's just a matter to see if your player is in trouble just because he's not able to adapt this length of the backswing. Another approach that is, for me, more functional is just to think about the power. When you think about the power generation, you can see that the forehand shot needs a first phase that is the storing of the potential energy. So it coincides to the preparation phase. Then there is the acceleration phase where you release of this energy. And finally, you have to brake to decelerate. It's the deceleration phase that coincides to the follow through. It's important to decelerate the energy and to be able to react and to prepare for the next shot. So what about the first stage, the lower limbs? The lower limbs are the first stage. They act to generate the force from the ground. And from this, you can have different role of the lower limbs, and you have also different stance. So depending on the stance you use, you act with the legs, the back legs, differently. So with neutral stance, you will use more the back leg in a forward movement, and with the open stance, you will see that you use more your back legs to go up. Okay, so in neutral stance, you see that you will use more what we call horizontal ground reaction force to move the center of gravity forward. And with the open stance, you use more vertical ground reaction force to move the center of gravity upward. So with slow motion, you just see how the player moves, and on this way, with open, you can't move forward to the ball. You just have to push the ground up. The second way is how you use the other leg. So the back leg is used to propulse, for propulsion, but the front leg is used for fixation. That is, if you are not able to fix solidly this front leg, you can't use correctly the propulsion. In open stance, you will see that the fixation point is the front leg as well, just by pushing the knee in front of the body. So for neutral stance, the fixation point is the front leg. So propulsion from the back leg, stabilization with the front leg. And in open stance, propulsion, vertical propulsion from the back leg or outside leg, depends. And fixation with the front leg in front of the body. When it comes to the acceleration phase, the lower limb has as well another role. That is, they have a balancing role when the arm and the trunk move to the contact points. The players need, in neutral stance, to solidly fix the front leg to the ground and to let behind the back leg. The back leg behind is just to avoid the hips to rotate too early during the movement. So you see neutral stance, solid anchor with the front and the back leg behind. And for the open stance, the other leg is in front. Oh, sorry. Sorry, a problem with my screen. Sorry about. I don't know what happened on my.
You want to show a video, Cyril, or?
No. I have a problem with my. I don't know why my PowerPoint is away.
You don't see it anymore?
Yes.
There it is.
Okay.
Yeah, you can start it again.
I don't know why. So, sorry. So yes, we're on this phase. Okay, just to explain the role of the. Oh. It doesn't respond, so sorry, I will try to do differently. I think it's my, I don't know if it's my computer or no, but I can't go on the. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, we can see it now.
Sorry for the inconvenience. I don't know what it is. Okay,
no problem.
So regarding the ground direction force is a very recent study because it's 2020. The recent study analyzed the influence of the leg drive on ball speed in semi-open stance. So the players have to hit balls at different speeds, and the reaction forces were recorded in a force platform. What we see with the results is that all the reaction forces explain 37% of the variance. That is, there is a correlation between the intensity of the forces, the ground direction force, and the ball speed. But the most important is that the peak horizontal force was the most influences the increase in ball speed. That is, if you increase the horizontal force, that is, you push a little more forward in this open stance, semi-open stance, you have an increase of the ball speed. So it's important tool for the coaches. Just have to push a little more, and it's logical, push a little more to the balls, and you can increase the ball speed. So we can act as coaches on the explosive and the directed action of the back leg. Sometimes to increase ball speed, the players rely only on the arm. Now, if you know that just by acting a little more on the ground, quickly on the ground, and then to rotate a little more, faster on the hips, you can increase the ball speed. Another study was to analyze the influence of the stance on the ball speed, because we speak between coaches and say, now open stance, you are more rotation, so you have more ball speed. Oh, yeah, but neutral stance, you can move to the ball. So it's interesting to have former ATP players who did the test. The players have to hit some balls, with neutral, either neutral or open, and then they compare the speed. There is always higher ball speed produced with neutral stance, even if it's slightly, it's 2 or 3%, but with neutral stance, you are able to produce more ball speed. So the explanation was that certainly with neutral stance, the neutral stance is more favorable to the creation of linear momentum. You go to the balls and you are more stable because you have the 2 feet aligned in the direction of the shot. So more stability, more momentum. So normally it's normal to translate it into gains in ball speed. But you will see next week that it's not just the form, just the shape of the neutral stance. You need to have the rhythm of the neutral stance. The neutral stance is moving to the ball that at the last time you anchor the front leg and then you rotate. If you are in neutral stance too early and you are waiting for the ball, it's very difficult to transfer the body weight. So it's important. The way you use the neutral stance is also important. But if you have to choose neutral or open, it's not the problem. Just because there is different situations and the stance, we know that the stance is situation specific. That is, every time you can go to the balls, use it. It's easy, but normally when you have to move laterally or you have to go back, it's sure that you have the open stance. So the goal is not to say it's only this one or this one. It's just to use correctly both stance in the shape and in the rhythm in order to produce the maximum ball speed you can. So you will see that from practical point of view, it's the perfect examples. You can hit forehand with different leg drive. You can act from propulsion from the back leg and reception on the back leg, just pivot on the leg. You can make a front foot up. So even if you have different type and positions, you just have to keep in mind that the role is always the same. The back foot, the role of the back foot is to give the propulsion to the ball, and the front leg is just here to balance the body and to avoid the hips to rotate too early in the stroke. So just focus on the back leg and just to see the action of the leg. You see the explosive power on the back leg. On this one, use the back leg to propulse himself, then land on this same and continue to run. On this way, you see that the pivot leads to the hip rotation. On this one, it's not with the front foot, it's the back foot that propels the body in front. And the same thing when you turn around the forehand. So we are now going to speak about the second stage. The second stage is the trunk, which is the main function of the trunk is to generate the horizontal speed of the shoulder and to actively stretch the muscles that are involved in the internal rotation of the shoulders and the flexion horizontal of the shoulder. So when you make the analysis, kinematic analysis, the shoulders is the end point, okay, of the trunk. That is what we say it's only 10, 20% of the maximum speed. It's just because the trunk, the leg drive of the trunk, the role is to rotate fast the shoulder and to push the shoulder forward, okay? So that is the main role of trunk rotation, to push the shoulder forward and to pull. During this, we have a coordination with the arms that stretch actively the shoulder. And you will see that in the third stage that this transition phase is relatively important to use the potential energy. So on this video, you can see how the leg drive facilitates the initiation of the trunk rotation. It's hips and then trunk rotation. And at the same time, there is a stretching on the shoulder. You can see that the shoulder is actively stretched. So it's a very important feature of the modern tennis. That is, this time you push with the legs, hip rotations, then you dissociate the hips, then the shoulder, and this dissociation leads to the leg of the racket that actively stretch the shoulder. That one. So there is another study that analyzed the influence of playing level on hip and trunk rotation. With a 3D kinematic analysis, the goal was to see if there is difference with ATP players or national players at contact. What is the ball speed at contact? And if there is an interaction with the speed of trunk and hips. And the results indicated that the best players were able to produce higher hip and trunk rotation speed at contact. And it leads to higher linear velocity of the shoulder and higher racket speed. So if you are able to achieve higher hip and trunk rotation speed at impact, you can say that normally it's a feature of the higher level. So it's not as easy. It's not because you are able to rotate fast that you can go that. It's just a matter of timing, the way you use it at the right time to have the peak acceleration late in the stroke. But it's a matter to say, okay, if I am able to increase this rotation from the hips and the trunk, normally I can have a little more faster ball speed. The same thing, if you just a reminder of the previous study, the increase in trunk rotation was correlated with the increase in post-impact ball velocity. So what I say during the seminar, if you have to focus on something with the players, it's more about use the ground to act quick on the ground, to rotate the trunk a little more fast. And if you do it correctly, you don't need to think about going fast with the arms. And the common error I saw all over the world is if you ask a player to hit a little more faster, you can see that forehand or the serve, he wants to rely more on the arm. So he wants to go fast with the arm, but it's not the good way. The good way is just to act more on the ground to allow a faster rotation of the trunk. And then with the chain, there is like a catapult effect. With the chain, you go fast with the arm. You have to be relaxed enough, but you go fast with the arm. Okay, so you just see now, in order to rotate the trunk a little faster, but to move forward, you need fixation points. And most of the times, there is some common error that is the big rotation on place, but not forward. So the deal is to say, is to try to move fast, but to move the shoulders through the contact point. And so you see, just imagine when you go in a boxing, it's the same way. If you want to go through your opponent, you need to move your shoulder through the head. It's the same thing with the forehand. If you are able to move through the contact zone, you have a more heavy ball, you have more power, what we call the power at contact, the force contact. And it's just a matter of fixing correctly the body in order to rotate, yes, to rotate, but to move forward. So you can see with Nadal, Simon, and Federer, it's the non-dominant arm and the non-dominant leg that act as fixation point in space. Whatever the stance you use, it's always the same. You use the non-dominant arm, you do the non-dominant leg to fix the body. So this picture, I use a lot this picture during the seminar because it's a, you can see Verdasco. So Verdasco is normally a lefty, here righty on the picture, but you can see that from A, B, C, it's the initiation of the trunk rotation. And you can see that the non-dominant arm, you've got the line here, the non-dominant arm doesn't move back. That is, it's like if you have a stick, he plants the stick on the ground, and then he uses this anchor to rotate the right shoulder through the contact point. Okay, so sometimes it's very interesting, and there is some exercise with the kids. You take a stick, you plant, like what skiing. You plant the stick, and then you go through just to how you can rotate moving forward and not to rotate on place. Okay. On the other picture, you can see with the skeleton, it's Federer. You can see the same thing. The left shoulders, okay, you use the non-dominant arm to initiate the rotation of the trunk, but then you fix this in the space in order to accelerate the dominant shoulder through the contact point. So you need first to accelerate and then to stop and to go on the other direction. So you use this anchor point first to initiate the trunk rotation and then to fix this point to go through. So now we are going to speak about the third stage. So the third stage is maybe the one that is, we speak a lot about the arms. That is, we see the lag, how you use the wrist, how you use something, what is the main factors to make some spin. So I will show you that there is now, from a scientific point of view, there is something that we know. And something that is sometimes in the opposite way that the way we were taught when we are young. So I'm 50, so it was a long time ago, but the way we were taught to put the arm in certain places is completely wrong in the modern game. And if you have this functional approach, you will see that there is some natural things you have to do. And if you explicit too much, the backswing, for example, you can't achieve this kind of modern forehand. So what are the upper limb rotations? The first one is the shoulder internal rotation. The second one is the forearm pronation, and then the wrist extension. When you speak about this rotation, you can see that the reversal of the direction of rotation occurs very lately in the acceleration phase. And sometimes I was taught like that. At the end of the backswing, I remember we have at the end of the backswing to have this flexion, this extension of the wrist. It's completely wrong. Now, it's just because in the acceleration phase, you have the lag of the racket, then you create the tension and the elastic energy on the forearm on the shoulder, and then the reverse of the direction occurs very, very close before the contact point. So the other thing that is interesting to know is that in my study, the only rotation that was corrected and differentiating the flat from the top spin forehand was just the forearm pronation, the amplitude of forearm pronation. So sometimes we say to make more top spin, you have to use more the wrist and so on. No, the only way to improve and to impart more top spin to the ball is to move more in supination than forearm pronation. Okay, so it's just this reversal from supination to pronation that increased the vertical component of racket speed. So if we speak about the heavy ball, because now at high level, there is no flat forehand. Most of the forehand, mainly in the men, a little less in the woman, but it starts to change. There is top spin, and the combination with the ball speed and top spin rate leads to what we call the heavy ball. That is a ball that has energy after the bounce, and that is hard to contact. Okay, it's Nadal is the perfect example. Thiem is the perfect example. So the study analyzed the different factors. So they put different factors, different hypotheses, but the only two factors that was correlated to ball top spin rate were the racket head angle at contact. That is, closer the racket, more top spin you can impart to the ball. And the second one was the vertical racket speed just before contact. That is, if you are able to increase what we call the forearm and internal rotation, because forearm and internal rotation are the main factors to move the racket from down to up. And in the same time, you are able to just close the racket, you have the most factors to increase ball speed. So just take a look at the racket, it's Federer. You can see that Federer, the pass of the hand is slightly horizontal, but the rackets move from down to up just thanks to the pronation, external to internal, and supination to pronation of the forearm. So just take a look at the different action now to understand what is the position of the arm at the initiation of the transition phase and how it reverses just before the contact point. So through the contact point, you have the complete acceleration, the complete pronation, full internal rotation. So I like the video 2, 3, 4 times because you have to be used to this position of the arm to better understand how you can use this elastic energy during the acceleration phase. And you see that it's during this acceleration phase that the racket lag occurs. Okay, the racket is behind. Let's see. During this acceleration, you see the shoulder is an external rotation. The racket is completely behind, so there is the extension of the wrist. And then, because of the reversal, you start the internal rotation, the forearm pronation, and the wrist flexion. Just try to focus on this video on the speed of the arm regarding the trunk. You can see that the trunk is very slow. We can see that it's like he's stopped to move, and then the arm is going fast in front, forward. So there is first the first part of the acceleration, that is the trunk, and then after, the arm is going fast forward. So now we have a big discussion with coaches because there is no study on this point. But if you have this functional approach, we know that from a neuromuscular point of view, it's very easy to accelerate the arms when you use off the elastic energy. That is, when you start from external rotation and then you go to internal, this elastic energy is going to the concentric phase, so you can act very quickly without energy, as little energy as possible. So when you are able to have all this rotation, it's the best way to move fast without lots of energy. But there is differences in the shape of the backswing, and there is some position that are better and other ones that are not better to do that. So the more common backswing position at the high level in ATP, it's what we call the racket position outside. That is, the players drop the racket to the side of the body. And there is another one, it's behind the body. It's more common for the men to put the racket outside, but if you take a look at Maciek, Barty, they have now the woman starts to have this shape of backswing, and behind it's more common. That is the ancient time. But you have like Del Potro, Gilles Simon. You have also men that have this classic way to move the racket. But this positioning are in impact can affect the way you will use the racket and all this rotation. You will see on the video, when Aleps goes forward, the angle on the wrist is practically the same from the initiation to the contact point. There is no much reversal. On the second way, Simon, that has a classic way, is in neutral. He's more in neutral situation, then he can have some external rotation of the shoulder, some lag. And the third one, Tsitsipas, is the modern forehand. He starts the transition phase with completely the end facing the ground, and then they have a lot of reversal of rotation from the transition and then go. So just take a look at this video and you will see the big difference. You see that there is already the angle, racket forearm angle is already down at the end of the backswing. So it's most trunk rotation without most independent arm motion. With Simon, you see there is no more angle. Then you will create the angle with the wrist during this acceleration. You see at the initiation phase, he creates the racket lag. The shoulder external rotation is during the acceleration and then reversal of the situation. And this one is what we call the modern one. And this positioning is in internal rotation. Then you go to external rotation for the first time, forearm supination, wrist extension, and all this rotation increase during the acceleration, and then there is the reversal. So it's like an elastic, okay? You stretch this elastic, and at the last time, you go to the contact. So just take a look closely now at the angle on the forearm and the racket. The same from the beginning to the contact. Now with this video, it's very interesting to see the shape of the backswing. And you will see that Federer just put the racket to the side. And because of that, there is this transitioning where you see the racket lag in the initiation of the transition phase. With Alep, you can see that the shape, the big loop, and then the racket is already in the same position at the end of the backswing, practically the same at the contact point. There is most trunk rotations, forward flexion, horizontal flexion of the shoulders, but there is not a lot of change in rotation of the wrist, forearm. So the big difference between these two types of forehand is the spin, okay? Federer is able to make a lot of spin to the balls, and Alep is not the same. So little backswing, okay, compared to a large backswing. But take a look at the acceleration phase, certainly at the same time, and you see that the arms move a little more faster with Federer. So another a common point that we discussed with coaches, and there is a lot of misconception about the wrist. You can see all the video on YouTube where we say the lag and snaps, you have to use the wrist to put a lot of speed, to let a lot of spin. But you have to be very careful because the kids, I saw a lot of kids using this part of the segment, the wrist, to hit the ball. But it's not the same way. If you take a look at how the wrist acts, remember, the wrist extension is done during the acceleration. Just because you are relaxed and the racket lags behind, just because of the inertia, you have the arms moving forward and the racket moving backward. So it creates this extension. And then, like an elastic, the racket goes forward very quickly. And you need to control that. That is, of course, there is a flexion, but there is not a flexion to hit the ball consciously. It's just that you have this energy from the wrist that you have to control in order to go through the ball. And at the contact point, all the study with AMG, they show that you have a lot of pressure on the grip at the contact. So if you are not able to squeeze the grip at the contact point, it's not possible to counteract the ball. Even if you make spin, because when you do a lot of top spin, all the balls are off center. So if you don't squeeze the grip, you are not able to do it correctly. So just be careful. I don't say that there is no wrist flexion. There is wrist flexion, but it's a consequence, and you have to control it correctly. So you have to let it be, but you have to control it, not consciously act to the ball with the hand. And that is a big mistake from the kids. If you use only these segments, you don't use correctly the kinetic chain, so you don't use correctly the trunk, you don't use correctly the arms. And sometimes with the kids, with the big rackets, you can think that they play tennis. With just the wrist and the new modern rackets, you can push the ball on the other way. It's no problem, on the other side. But when you go and you grow, if you have just used to use this part of the arm instead of all the kinetic chains, you can't impart power anymore. So be careful to that. The wrist is just, you have to feel it, but you don't have to consciously use this. If you, to better understand that, you can see the big difference with Del Potro, was an Eastern grip, and Sock, extreme grip. How you can say that these two guys use the same way the wrist? It's impossible. So if you take a look at the wrist-hand grip, we can see that to move the racket forward, the Eastern grip used the palmar flexion. This movement is used to move the racket forward, and the radial deviation is used to move the racket upward. So it's a combination of palmar flexion and radial deviation to move the racket forward and up to make the spin. When you have an extreme grip, like sock, it's completely different. To move the racket forward, you use the ulnar deviation, okay, like that. And the palmar flexion, that is, move the racket up. So depending on the grips you have, the wrist can't act the same way. And just take a look at Del Potro at the contact point. You can see that the wrist is always in an extension position. Slightly after the contact is always in extension. And after, of course, there is relaxation. The same thing for socks. But if you look at real speed, it's so fast that there is losing. The losing of the wrist is very fast after the contact point. But with slow motion, you can see clearly that during the contact point, the wrist is firmly squeezed, and then after there is only the release. So be careful not to use the wrist consciously to hit the ball, okay? There is some different kind of injuries regarding the grip. With Eastern grip, the wrist injuries are more on this radial part. And with the Western grip is not on this one. So you see that different the grip, and because you use the wrist differently, you can have different zone of injury. Just to be sure to understand, most of the players, and notably the kids, when they contact the balls, they want to go what we call the windshield wiper forehand. That is, they move slightly and fast to the left of the body, if you're righty. But they don't see that the players at high level always go what we call an extension, forward extension in the arm. And it's the big difference. If you want to have heavy ball or a force contact at impact, you need to go through the ball. And you see with Dimitrov, the first part of the follow through is when you go, you move, and the racket reaches the most forward direction. You can see that the elbow is fixed, and then after there is the release. And with slow motion, we can see that the elbow is used as a fixation point. Like the first part that's relaxed is the forearm and the wrist. And that's why sometimes you can think that you use a lot the wrist during the acceleration phase, but it's just because of it's the first thing that is relaxed after the extension. So you go for it. The same thing from back, the follow through, you can see from the back view that there is first the extension through the shot. And when the racket reaches the most forward position, then after there is relaxation. And on this picture, it's important for me. It's always my focus when I take a look at the player is how they use the relaxation. Sometimes if you relax too early with the hips and the trunk or the arms, you can't have power. So the goal is to have this fixation point, this anchor point on the hips, on the trunk and the arm through the contact. And after only, you can move around and bring the back foot, for example, bring the back foot, pose the left foot. But the most important thing is to move forward the ball. And this video, you will see how the elbow is projected forward. And then there is relaxation of the forearm. But first, extension, fixation, and then relaxation of the forearm and the wrist. That's why there is different type of what we call the follow through. Sometimes you finish up, you finish around the shoulder, you finish sometime down. It's just because it's very individual. The way you use the relaxation is individual. But for me, it's very interesting to focus on this endpoint. That is, with the kids, I say that the elbow, they have to imagine the eye on the elbow. And normally, they have to project the elbow in a way that the eye of the elbow can take a look at the target. If you have this in mind, you will be sure to have this extension. The projection of the elbow in front of the body, and then after only you have this relaxation. So first you project the elbow. So for me, it's the best way to think about how to project the arm forward. Instead of thinking of the racket, just think about the elbow. If you project the elbow forward, in consequence, the racket will move forward. So that's it. It's a common point. If you take a look at all the finishing position at the modern game, because there is spin, top spin, there is a common position that is invariant. It's the racket that, take a look, that pointing outside, okay, just because of the forward pronation of the racket. And the trunk and the hips deceleration that occurs after. There is the extension of the arm, and then after they start to relax and to come to the net. So be careful to have first this extension, and with slow motion, it's very easy to do this. First, the extension of the arm, and then you can decelerate the lower body. So just to finish this presentation, it was short to do this, but I would like to summarize with 5 key points. If you have to observe a player on different phase of the forehand, you just have to be sure that there is this key point and the common point. So the first one is a split step and uniturn, because when you analyze the forehand, sometimes you speak about the backswing. But for me, a forehand starts with the information of the incoming ball. When the opponent hits the ball, you start the forehand. If you are not on the right time at this time, okay, you can be late. And sometimes you say it's a matter of rhythm. No, it's just a matter of reaction. And the way you move on the first step is important. So on the first step, you take the information, the split, you are in the air when you take the information. And then when you go down, you land on the outside foot. And in the same time, it's not after, but in the same time, you start to turn the shoulder. That's what we call the uniturn. It's the same thing. I land on the outside foot, and the same way, I push the body to the side with a uniturn. So when you start like that, maybe you have a chance to do something good after. The second point is the loading position. If you have a neutral, if you have an open, if you are in neutral situation, if you are in defensive situation, if you have attacking aggressive situation, it's always the same. Before going forward with your racket, you need to have an anchor point on the back leg. So when you have time, it's very easy. And you can see that there is a big difference between neutral and open stance. When I was young, I was taught to position my foot, my back foot, parallel to the baseline, to the neutral stance, and the same to the open stance. Now it's completely different. In open stance or semi-open stance, you can see that the back foot is always pointing 45 degrees. It's just because with this positioning, you can act more up, and you can accelerate more the hip rotation. So it's very interesting to take a look at the way your players position the back foot when they move laterally. So when you move laterally, with this angulation, you stop your inertia and then you can go up and accelerate the hips during the movement. For a neutral stance, it's different because with the foot parallel to the baseline, you can push forward. So depending on the direction of the propulsion, you can have different way of positioning the back foot. So the back leg, all the body weight stay on the back leg, most time as possible, just before the movement to the ball. The shoulders are logically a little more backward than the hips. Okay, it's what we call the separation angle. There is some study that analyze the amplitude. They sometimes, like for the golf, we say, okay, more angle you have, more speed you have on the rotation of the trunk, but it's not true. So that is very individual. So sometimes you have a little angle, but if you are able to go fast, it's better than to find a big angle and not be able to moving it correctly in the acceleration phase. So don't speak too much about trunk angle. If there is not enough, you can say, okay, rotate a little more, but I think that you have to let the players find the right way to move fast on the rotation. The position of the non-dominant arm, it's a lot of discussions with the other coaches. This positioning is not to point to the ball and so on for the distance. It's just a matter of orienting the shoulder. Okay? With this non-dominant arm stretched parallel to the baseline, you are sure that the shoulders are turned enough. The key point 3 is the leg drive. Remember, we have different direction of the propulsion. If you have in an open stance, you move up, so it's more vertical, the dominant. And when you have a neutral stance, it's more of a forward direction, so you have more horizontal momentum. What we call the triple extension is the ankle, knee, and hip. Most of the time, I think that the players are not conscious of the role of the ankle. The ankle is the joint for me that is more important. That is, it's the feet. The role of the foot is to start to generate. So sometimes the players relies more on the thighs, okay, so on the knee extension, but not enough on the feet. So you have to teach the same way. So I know there is also some motor preferences. We know that we have what we call the aerial or terrestrial. It's different. But in the same way, you have to use a lot of what you can do. The foot, explosive knee, but you have to move it correctly in the right direction. The key point 4, very important, is the vertical axis. A lot of time, you can see your players just before the contact points to anticipate the recovery and to lean on the trunk. What is important, if you want to have impact force, you need to stay very vertical on the trunk. Sometimes you have some difference on the alignment of the shoulder to adjust on the height of the ball, its impact, but the goal is to have this axis of rotation that is stay vertical to move forward. So the non-dominant side acts with the arms and with the, you see on the open stance with the front foot to encore. So it's just a matter of postural balance at the hips, okay? Don't let the hips move too early in the rotation, and the same thing for the trunk. And finally, the 5 points, the key point 5 is the extension. Take time with slow motion with your players, just on the side view, to see really if there is this extension to the control. And you will be surprised, I think, that most of the time, just after the contact, the racket is going early to the left when you are right-handed. And this extension is not present. So if you work on this extension, you can see that you will see that the ball is heavier, then the bounce of the ball is faster, So it's very important for me. It's the big difference between good players and very good players is sometimes on this area, this extension. But this extension depends on all the factors, the previous factors, that is trunk rotation, stabilization, and so on.